Our next chapter covers modern geologic processes. And so let's talk about that. And for the most part, they're going to be similar to historical geologic processes, especially what we call internal processes like earthquakes and volcanoes and that sort of thing. What we call the endogenic or internal processes. These are the things that have built California's landscape over time, and they continue to do so. So for the internal processes, we'll do a quick review of those, but most of the background information is going to be in the previous learning unit. And in this learning unit, we're going to talk more about the exogenic or external processes. And these are the things that denude or wear things down. And these are the processes that have reshaped the rock landscape of California over time. So just to recap, we have internal or endogenic processes. These are powered by heat in the earth. And these build up landscapes like the Sierra Nevadas, for example. So volcanoes, lava, tectonism, that sort of thing. And then we have external processes that are powered by weather. And these generally wear things down or rearrange landscapes. So think erosion from water. Again, the internal processes that create the initial landscapes, and then we have the external processes that reshape the landscapes over time. Just a quick recap, you should know what the three internal processes are. The big one is plate tectonics. This is the global movement of tectonic plates we've discussed in the past. The other is volcanism, processes that involve molten rock, both above the ground in the case of volcanoes and below the ground in case of features like batholiths, like the Sierra Nevada. And then lastly, tectonism, the deformation of or breaking up of Earth's crust. So for example, along the San Andreas Fault, a lot of those landscapes have been shaped because of the movement of the San Andreas Fault. And the other set of processes are exogenic. So I want to give a brief overview, and then I'll have a few more detailed discussions of some of the exogenic processes. So what we have is initial landscapes are created by endogenic or internal processes. These are things that increase relief or pick up the environments. And then over time, we have exogenic processes that will erode and reshape the environment until they go from being an area of high relief or tall environment to a very kind of, what one student has called one time, a nubby environment, something that's very worn down. So for the external processes, we also have a term we use called denudation. And this is just a general term that really encompasses all of the external processes, which means to disintegrate, wear away, and remove rock material. Now, denudation can be broken into a few parts. Three general areas: weathering, mass wasting, and erosion. And these generally fall in a sequence. What happens first is that the rock that is created by internal processes is weakened by exposure to air and water. Once weakened, it becomes detached and gravity moves the material downhill. That part is called mass wasting. And the key thing about mass wasting, it's the movement by gravity. It's gravity moving the material down. Then once the material is moved down, erosion takes over. And erosion is about the removal, transportation, and then deposition. It actually carries the material somewhere else and drops it off. And erosion is a bigger topic of the three, and it involves different types of what we call geomorphic agents, things that will act, different moving materials that will cause the removal, transportation, and deposition of material. Generally, we have stream erosion, we have moving water. That is the biggest one that has shaped California. Is particularly in desert environments. We also have wind erosion, so the moving air will move material around. And then lastly, some areas of California have been shaped dramatically by glacial erosion. And Yosemite Valley in particular is one that's been shaped by glacial erosion.